the first thing you should really be doing is thinking about where is the opportunity for you. So there's some exercises that we do that look at what are your current channels, where are you having your conversations right now within your business, and what kind of conversations are you having. That could be over the phone lines, it could be emails being sent to you, it could be things being sent on your instant messaging, it could be any contact that you have with your end users. What does that conversation look like? I think that's the best place to start, is to try and find out what conversations you're already having.
That is the voice of Kane Simms of VUX World. He and I talk about how valuable it is to listen to the voice of your customer as you're planning out a voice experience in this voice platform. Hi, my name is Vickie Maris, and this is episode 24 of Agile Digital Business. This is part 2 of my conversation with Kane Simms. He's the co-founder of VUX World, and you can find his podcast at VUX.world. His co-host is Dustin Coates. If you are not already a subscriber to their show, I highly recommend it. In this part of our conversation, you'll hear us talk about world-class voice experiences, the definition of an Amazon Alexa skill, or you could also apply that definition to the Google action that you might create for the Google Home Assistant. We both share our experiences with a flash briefing and what those are designed for. Who are they serving? How are they being of service? As we get towards the end of the episode, you are going to hear me ask Kane a final question in our conversation about what is the starting point for a marketing person who's wearing lots of different marketing hats or has several different responsibilities, but isn't yet really started in voice for his or her customer. Where does that marketing person get started? Or maybe you're an entrepreneur running your own business and you're wearing that marketing hat, or you would like to delegate it to a virtual assistant. I encourage you to stay with me through the entirety of this episode so that you can hear Kane's very helpful response to that question. Right before I get to Kane's response to that question, I take a quick break in this episode and share some information about a new 30-day online journaling group that I have coming up and some other information about how we can stay connected. I do include my introduction of Kane. I repeat it in this episode, so in case you haven't yet heard part 1, that way you can get to know him a little bit better before we jump into this episode, which is part 2 of my conversation with Kane Simms of VUX World. All right, let's go.
She's an author, instructor, conference speaker, and I write songs and play music with her. Hi, my name's Scott Greeson. Let me introduce you to my wife, Vickie Maris, the host of Agile Digital Business podcast.
I would like to welcome Kane Simms to the podcast studio, and I want to tell you just a bit about Kane before we jump into our conversation. He is the co-founder of the podcast VUX World and also has a company that runs a design studio, and he's going to tell us a little bit more about the VUX services that he has there with his company. I've looked up his podcast and have listened to many episodes of it. He has over 90 episodes of his show and has been podcasting for well over a year with his co-founder, Dustin Coates. Comes to us from across the pond. Kane, I'm going to have you give us a little bit more about your background, but I want to say thank you so much for being here on Agile Digital Business podcast. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation.
Likewise. Thank you for having us, Vickie. It's an absolute pleasure. And apologise if the voice is a little bit quiet. Our baby's asleep downstairs. Trying my best not to wake him up because last night he woke up 3 times and that resulted in me getting next to no sleep. So apologies if the voice is a little bit quiet, but I'm sure it'll be fine.
Oh, I think it will be great. And I appreciate that you want to keep things quiet on your end. And also thank you for doing the interview in the evening on your side of the world. I appreciate that. So I hope we can not wake up your baby.
I'm sure it'll be fine. I'll just try not to stamp my feet if I get a little bit excited.
Do you have an example in mind of a voice experience that you just thought was a really neat example of a world-class voice experience? Because I get questions about that from business owners or representatives of companies who just aren't really even sure what the definition of a voice experience is.
My definition of a world-class voice experience is something that is either engaging and entertaining, or something that gets out of your way and lets you just get on with the task. So some of the best examples of the entertainment type of skills is there's a company called Earplay, and they used to, well, I say used to because they now have a platform which they are pushing at the moment. But before they, what led to them creating this platform was that they used to create interactive stories and interactive audio experiences. And so they've got work with Universal Studios. They worked on the Jurassic World skill, and then Earplay and another company called Xandra, they work kind of together often, and they've worked on either one of them or both of them have worked on like the Wayne investigations, which came out I think it was it round about one of the launch of the latest Batman film, I think, potentially. They've worked on the Dunkirk Experience, which was a skill that was launched alongside the Dunkirk film. They worked on the Westworld skill from HBO. And so really the leading edge in terms of the kind of like the leisurely kind of engaging experiences, I'd say, are those two companies. And the reason for that is because they are so... in terms of the quality of the sound design, the soundscaping, the sound production, it's all kind of like movie quality stuff. They've done stuff with Nickelodeon as well, and done a lot of work with like interactive stories with SpongeBob SquarePants and stuff. And the level of sound production and sound quality and sound design that goes into these things, they are like movie productions. And so that's one of the real key things that we try and talk about and push, not just with our clients but on the podcast as well, is the importance of sound design and creating a sound environment. When audio is all you have, there is nothing more important than how it sounds. And there was a study by Voicebot. I don't know if your listeners are familiar with Voicebot, but if you're not, definitely check it out. It's one of the leading kind of industry analyst sites, and they fund reports and research studies and stuff like that. And the most recent one they did release last week or a few weeks back, depending on when this goes out, was looking at comparing synthetic voices, so robotic voices like the standard Alexa voice, with human voices and recorded audio. And they found that 71% of people trusted the human recorded audio more than the synthetic stock robot kind of voice. And so those are the two companies that I would say are doing the interactive stuff really, really well. And the company that are doing the kind of like utility, if you like, utility-based stuff really, really well, which is either helping people get something done or kind of like serving something after someone has asked for it, which sounds really simple, but it's actually quite challenging. So if someone says, play the Joe Rogan podcast, or play the Joe Rogan Experience podcast, or play Joe Rogan, then the TuneIn Skill does a pretty good job of recognizing that you're asking for a podcast and finding the right podcast for you. Now, it doesn't have any conversation design in there. You just ask it for something and it'll play it. And 9 times out of 10, it does it pretty well. If you ask Alexa to play the VUX World podcast, it'll hop into TuneIn and it'll play the VUX World podcast. So they kind of serve people's needs well without the real need for intense conversation design. But there's really, really good examples of really simple ones. Like you can ask when the last posting date is. If you wanted to send a card or a present to your grandmother who lives in Spain or whatever, then you can ask Alexa when the last posting date is, and it'll use the Royal Mail skill. And that's all it'll do. It'll just tell you when the last posting date is. If you want to get a package to Spain, you need to post it by X date. So those are the kind of the two extremes. One is the one-shot request and response, and the other is the kind of immersive, interactive audio experience. And there is examples of companies doing things at both ends of the scale pretty well. The thing that kind of sits in the middle, I find, is where the conversation design is needed, which is things like the Virgin Trains skill, which is it will allow you to order a train ticket on Alexa. And in order to do that, it needs to gather certain information from you, and it needs to essentially have a conversation so that you can tell it what you need and it can get from it what it needs in order to give you your train ticket. So the Virgin Train skill is a pretty good example as well.
I feel like in case there's somebody listening who's not familiar with what we're talking about with a skill, do you mind if we jump into that definition just a moment to mention a skill or a Google action?
Yeah, so a skill is essentially, it's like a voice app. So it's like an application, more or less. So if you've got a smartphone, which I'm sure you do, you can download an app that will increase the functionality on your smartphone by giving you access to information or services or content or whatever it is. And a skill is the same thing. It will increase the functionality of Alexa. It's something that's created by a third party, and it's essentially the thing that you build when you create additional capability on Alexa. It's essentially a voice app. It's the equivalent of an app on your phone. And Google's is called an action, which is similar, although with Google, they define an action as anything the Google Assistant can do. And so the reason why that's different is because with Alexa, to create a skill, you create a application, essentially. You build an app and you launch it on Alexa, and that's the extent of it. That's a skill. It's like you're teaching Alexa a skill is the concept behind it. With Google, they are wanting to you give Google Assistant an action that it can perform, which might be into a third-party application. So, for example, maybe you can launch the one that we've had on the podcast, which is pretty good, is the Hidden Cities Berlin action, which is like an interactive documentary taking you through the city Berlin, and you'll meet loads of the locals and stuff like that. It's an interactive audio documentary. So that's a third-party application that was built for the Google Assistant. But you can also do things like what they call in-app actions, which is you can link Google Assistant on an Android to your app. So if you have let's say you have a restaurant booking app, someone could ask Google Assistant, book me a table at Il Vesuvio on Friday at 7 o'clock, and Google Assistant will take what you've just said, hop you out into the app, and pre-populate the app with the things that you've just said. So it'll pre-populate the app with the table time of 7 and the date of Friday and all that kind of stuff. So Google still class that as an action, and there's still some development needed, but you're not building a full application, if that makes sense.
Thank you. And I know there will be people listening that will be saying thank you for that definition.
Just translate the word skill and action and just swap it for app is the easiest way of explaining it. It goes deeper than that, but that's fundamentally on a surface level what it is.
When I first started exploring it for my own podcast, I was inspired by, I had done an interview back in episode 14 with Brielle Nickoloff.
Yeah, I've seen that one. Yeah, it was really good.
Thank you. And when I was listening to her talk about the sequence that, if we just talk about Amazon Alexa for a moment, that Alexa goes to for finding the information, and the AlexaSkill is the second place that she stops. So I'm like, ooh, I need my podcast available. Oh, I just invoked her. So I wanted that one of the podcast available and able to be found that way. I eventually will probably change up my skill I've got some new ideas for it, but at least I've gone through the process of creating one. And for those of you listening who you're thinking of doing this, it's to just create a basic skill. There are all kinds of templates that you can use that are provided by Amazon. And I created one that's called a flash briefing so that people, when they ask for their news, if they enable my skill, which is called Agile Digital Business, it becomes a part of their flash briefing whenever they ask to hear the news. Have you done something similar with any parts of your business, Kane?
For ourselves, we do have a flash briefing. The problem with it that we found is that we launched it before we fully understood what was required in order to do it successfully, essentially. Because with flash briefings, it's something that has to be it needs to be kind of daily, and to get the best out of it, it really should be pretty well produced. And although we have the facilities to do that, and there's enough content out there for us to do that, with other things going on, we just found it really difficult to stick to the schedule, essentially. So it wasn't something that we had prioritized. So I think that's actually an opportunity going begging there, really, because there is some good flash briefings out there. The Business Insider flash briefing is pretty good. There's one that Peter Stewart does, which I think is called the Smart Speakers Daily, where he goes through news in the voice kind of industry. And I know Teri Fisher does a pretty good one as well from Alexa in Canada. And so we didn't want to do one for the sake of doing it. We wanted to do one that would be valuable and not kind of be repeating what's already been done, which I think there's scope for. And we've got a lot of material on the podcast. It's got a lot of tips and tricks and insights that I think would be useful to be chopped up into a series of flash briefings, or even just we could just pick one insight every day. But it's just been a bandwidth thing at the moment. Is something that we know there's an opportunity sitting there, but we haven't had the bandwidth to get onto it.
I so agree, and I don't mean I agree for your podcast, but I have said that with my own, that right now I'm using the RSS feed from from Libsyn, where I host the podcast. And so everything you just said, unless I was breaking it apart into little nuggets and finding just the bits that would make sense as news, it's only being updated as often as I upload a new podcast, and then it only stays up there for a week. And my podcast is about on an every 10-day to every 2-week consistency. So
have you got any feedback from people about that format in terms of it being a long podcast on a flash briefing?
I have not yet, but I just don't know. I don't know that many of my audience are using flash briefings yet. So I'm not sure although that being said, I've seen my download numbers go up since I added the flash briefing.
Yeah. It's interesting because we still get people trying the flash briefing. So I see on the analytics whenever someone tries to access it. So we know that there's people trying to get to it. Every now and then it'll spike. So maybe someone's found an old podcast where we were promoting it or something. So we know there's something there. But I think that the common, at this moment in time, the common kind of practice is to try and keep your flash briefings short, like between 30 seconds and 2 minutes. But I'm not convinced that is where it will continue to be. So for example, if someone's got 5 flash briefings, I maybe have 5 possibly. I've got the BBC, Business Insider, I listen to Peter Stewart's, I listen to Teri Fisher's, I think I've got another one in there as well somewhere. So I suppose the question is, how long do people listen to flash briefings for, and would it work having a longer form piece of audio in that flash briefing mix? I don't think I haven't got an answer for that. It's just a genuine. It'll be interesting to kind of find out and to get some feedback about how people feel about slightly longer flash briefings.
I have wondered that same thing, and I noticed that flash briefings will cut, like with my podcast, which is roughly around 30 minutes long. The flash briefing cuts it off at 10 minutes.
Yeah, that's the max. That's a max.
One of my,
load, isn't it?
Yeah, One of my colleagues in the podcasting space that does a search engine optimization podcast, I have noticed that they're alternating episodes. So they do their regular weekly longer episode, and then they do one that they label as news. And it's only 5 minutes or less, and it's picking out just the news bits that they've cut out from the episode they released a few days before. I haven't asked him the question, but I'm guessing that they're doing that because they are probably using their podcast hosting RSS feed for their flash briefing. I should get on the phone and ask him to see.
I can't speak from experience because we haven't put in the work to get the flash briefing up and running. However, there is case studies out there like Teri Fisher from Alexa in Canada, who he had a flash briefing and he did it 500 days consecutively. And for the 500th day, he launched a partnered skill. So he launched a skill which was called something like Crack the Code. And for the 500th episode of his flash briefing, he launched this skill. And the idea was that every day on the flash briefing, he'd give you a part of the code or the part of the riddle, and you would need to go to the Crack the Code skill to see if you can crack the code. And if you do crack the code, he had prizes to give away, like free memberships for software and devices, Echoes and Echo shows and stuff like that. From what I can gather, and based on the podcasts he's been on since then talking about it, it was wildly successful. But it took him 500 episodes to do. So I think that's the kind of the takeaway there, is that I think there is definitely opportunities with flash briefings to fit into someone's morning routine. If you can provide value, if you can get the format right, and if you can stick to it and be consistent with it, then you've got essentially at least 2 minutes of engagement, or 10 minutes seemingly if you want to make one a bit longer, of engagement that you can have with your potential audience every single morning. Because most people, I can't say most people do listen to flash briefings every morning, but there is a proportion of people that do, and I'm certainly one of them. So I think there is definitely an untapped thing there, is to dedicate yourself to producing daily flash briefings.
I want to take a quick break here in the episode and mention that if the things that you are learning as you listen to this podcast, and particularly here in Season 2, where I'm very focused on voice and voice first and voice search marketing, I would encourage you to visit my website and take a look at the past episodes and see if there are some topics in episodes I have already published that might be helpful to you in your journey in preparing your business or your department for the things that are happening in the voice platform. With my work at the university keeping me so fully deployed, I have found that by sharing in the podcast here, it's the best way that I can pass along what I'm learning. I can create the podcast in my evening hours and weekend hours, and at this point in my career and journey, it's been the best way for me to be able to serve you. I also do conference speaking in concurrent sessions, in workshops, and as a keynote. And if you're interested to learn where I'm going to be speaking in the months coming up, I have another spot out on the website where I keep a list of the conferences and learning events and various things where I'm going to be involved. And I do want to remind you, as I have mentioned in previous episodes, if you're looking for a simple way to say thank you and to support the podcast, I truly appreciate your support through my Patreon account. I have two options out there. One is to provide monthly support of the show in the amount of $2 or whatever is appropriate for your budget each month. And you can change that amount at any time, increase it or stop the donation. It's not hard to do it all through Patreon. The other thing that I have created out in Patreon is a listener community for you and others like you who are interested in these topics and would like to dig a little deeper. So what I've been doing is sharing links and resources. I can create polls and questions and give you homework assignments at that Patreon account. A lot of that material you can access free of charge. But if you'd like to be an active member of the community and also getting access to the special content that I create for my patrons, then please subscribe at the $10 per month or higher level. I really do appreciate your donations or your subscriptions. They help me with the costs that are involved in producing the show for you and doing the research. And the interaction with you provides me with great feedback on the topics that you are the most interested in and what I should be leaning into for future episodes of the show. So through your participation, your feedback, your joining of my email list, which you can do by sending an email to teachinspireconnect at getresponse.net. And you don't even have to have anything in the subject heading or the email body. When you send that email, just send an email to teachinspireconnect at getresponse.net. That automatically will put you on my email list, and I can keep you informed of things that we have coming up. The last thing I want to quickly mention is a new 30-day journaling group that I'm starting for people who are interested in developing the practice of journaling. You may remember from, I think it was episode 18, where I presented some content from my new journal that I've created for people who are experiencing grief from a loss. And it's designed to help you develop the practice of journaling or to get back into the habit of journaling if you've gotten out of that habit. I have found journaling to be so healing and so therapeutic. And also it's been helping me build my business. The ideas just pour onto the page when I keep my journal. So if you're interested in that 30-day group, you can find the details at my website, vickiemaris.com/30-day journal. I'm starting a new group on the 20th of the month, and I plan to do that for the next several months. So even if you are listening to this episode a little bit later than when it was initially published, I have a feeling there's still going to be opportunity for you to join one of my online groups of people who are journaling for 30 days and keeping each other accountable and supporting one another in that process. I would love to have you join us. All right, let's get back to the rest of the content in this episode. So I have one more question I want to ask you before we wrap up, and that is related to the perspective of a business owner or somebody in a company who isn't yet paying attention to what's happening in the voice community. Do you have a suggestion for a starting point? So, picture you're talking to the person I'm picturing is a marketing person in a company who's wearing lots of different hats, probably doesn't have a whole lot of bandwidth, and is realizing that voice is important. Where would you say that person ought to start with voice?
In terms of kind of reading up about it, or in terms of doing something about it, or in what sense?
In terms of getting something put in place for their company.
I think that the first thing you should really be doing is thinking about where is the opportunity for you. So there's some exercises that we do that look at what are your current channels, where are you having your conversations right now within your business, and what kind of conversations are you having? That could be over the phone lines, it could be emails being sent to you, it could be things being sent on your instant messaging, it could be any contact that you have with your end users. What does that conversation look like? I think that's the best place to start, is to try and find out what conversations you're already having. And then it's a case of if you wanted to consider doing something in this kind of environment, we do these workshops where it's a day-long workshop. We go from absolutely nothing to a prototype at the end. Because one of the things is that what people will tend to do is, rather than do the research and have a look at what conversations they're currently having and the kind of things that are working already on these platforms, they'll tend to just have an idea and then want to just go with that idea. So the amount of times that a client will come to us already with an idea of what they want to do, having not really sat down and thought about who their target market is and what would be best appropriate, is unbelievable. So we've kind of got this workshop where we'll go from absolutely nothing through a whole ideation phase. We'll explore all kinds of different ideas, all kinds of different options for what a use case might look like. We then have some exercises to whittle those use cases down to a single use case or a small group of use cases, and then we prototype or act out in person what a conversation might look like for each one of these use cases, and then we kind of like refine that conversation. And by the end of that day, we have a rough idea of what kind of use cases make sense, and then it's a case of carrying on with your research, carrying on testing, and starting to do some prototyping and testing on it. So there's ways of making it happen cheaply. There's ways of exploring it quickly. It's just a case of I would recommend starting with having a look at what conversations you're already having, and whether those are appropriate conversations to be having on these channels. And I'd also recommend you doing your homework on these channels themselves. So if you don't use Siri and you've got an iPhone, start using Siri. If you don't use Google Assistant and you've got an Android phone, start using Google Assistant. If you don't have an Echo, get one. They're $22 now in the Black Friday week. So surround yourself with these technologies and try and use them every day for the kind of things that you would expect people to use them to contact your company about. And you'll soon start learning what they're good at, you'll soon start learning what they're not so good at, and you'll soon start learning where the opportunities might be for your brand.
Thank you. I think that's some terrific advice. I would like to also share with people, I also like to teach social media engagement, and I sometimes get some pushback about various social platforms, but I think it's kind of fun to say, hey, we met on Twitter.
Yes. Yes, we did.
So folks, I was commenting underneath a video that Kane had posted when he was, I'm not sure if you were walking just out for a walk or walking to work or something.
Yeah, that tends to be. I've been doing a daily LinkedIn video, and I've been putting it out on Twitter as well. So whenever I go for a walk, whenever I go for a break, or I walk the dog or something like that, I'll just film a quick 1 to 2 minute video of whatever I'm thinking about at that time, and kind of invite the community to tell me I'm wrong or stimulate some kind of discussion, basically. And that's that was one of them.
Yes. So I often will find things, in Twitter and LinkedIn are the two platforms where I like to hang out the most often, and I will often do a search on a hashtag. So I imagine I found one of your videos via a search on a hashtag or a particular topic related to voice. And whatever comment I put underneath your video, you replied back in a message and said, hey, I'd be happy to chat with you on your podcast if you'd like. So here we are. So
Indeed.
I love it when things like social media can help make connections across the globe, literally.
Well, our co-founder, Dustin Coates, Google developer expert, he's a published author now. He's one of the few people on the planet who can say he wrote the book on voice application development. And I launched the podcast in February 2018, and then I was probably about 5 or 6 episodes in, and someone commented on Twitter and said, this is really, really good. Really liking the fact that you're delving into the design and the strategic side of voice. But what would be also good is if you had a developer who knew the technical side, so you can ask some more technical questions of some of the guests as well. So I said, okay. Then it was Jan Koenig, one of the founders of Jovo, who said that. And I responded to Jan and said, right, if anyone knows anyone who's a developer who's up for doing a bit of co-hosting, then let me know. And Dustin Coates responded and said, I'm up for it. So we had a chat, we had a few conversations, we tried co-hosting together with a podcast episode featuring Mycroft, which is the open source voice assistant. And fast forward nearly 2 years later, and we're both running a company, and we've been doing a whole load of work together for 2 years. And all that started with a comment on Twitter.
That is a great story. Thank you for sharing that. And you guys do a terrific job co-hosting your show. It's wonderful.
Thank you. We try. We do try.
I keep sharing your various episodes out with individuals that I've had conversations with. I'm like, oh, wait, this would answer the question you just asked me. Here's the episode.
It's actually, you're not wrong. I mean, I've noticed that certainly online, and I try not to do it sometimes as well, because it seems as though I'm really just trying to promote the podcast when I'm not. I'm actually genuinely trying to share something that is of relevance. But what I've noticed is that because we've been doing this podcast now for quite a while, and we've spoken to a whole load of like the industry experts and some of the, pioneers of this kind of space, we tend to have episodes that cover quite a wide variety of topics. But whenever we have a conversation, our podcast episodes are quite detailed. We kind of really get into practical detail on stuff. And I find myself having conversations online where people are kind of saying, they'll mention something to do with sound design or conversation design, or they'll ask something like, I think I've seen something that Netflix did in this space, or whatever it might be. And we, not all the time, but quite often, we've either got a podcast episode that looks at that case study, or that talks about this topic, or that features a person that's been spoke about. And so it's quite kind of interesting how, consistency and persistency and keep on keeping on. And after 2 years, we've now got a whole load of content that covers a whole host of various topics. But I do try not always stick the link in there, because it makes it seem as though I'm like hijacking the conversation to promote the podcast, when that's not really what I'm trying to do.
I can relate to that a little bit. My podcast is really young compared to the number of episodes you have, but my vote is keep sharing the links to your episodes, because they're very helpful.
Thank you.
Oh gosh. Well, this has been wonderful, Kane. Thank you for taking the time to visit with me. And I know you are very active in LinkedIn, and you're posting videos out there every day. So folks, if you would like to catch up with what Kane is working on right now, that's my recommendation, would be to follow him in LinkedIn, comment under his videos or other posts. And then also, as you heard, he repurposes some of his content out in Twitter. So if you are a Twitter user, that's another great place to catch up with Kane. Is there anything else you would like to add before we wrap up?
Not really. I would just say, do reach out, and it's not a sales pitch as such. We are active members of the community, and we spend most of our time we're on the podcast side of things, kind of becoming and integrating ourselves as part of the community. And we have we've met so many good people, and we've made a really good network. And so if you are genuinely interested in trying to figure out what voice means for you or for your company, then don't just reach out, because we're not going to try and sell you something. We'll try and get you integrated into the community, and we'll try and share the resources that we have. We'll try and share the knowledge that we have, and all we want to do is help people make truly, truly great conversational experiences.
Thank you for that offer, and folks, take him up on it. I encourage you to continue to be curious about what we need to be doing as business owners and marketers within companies. This is not something that's going to go away. At least that's my opinion. So we need to be paying attention to what's happening in voice.
Indeed.
Thank you, Kane. This has been a pleasure to visit with you, and I hope the baby is still asleep.
I think he is. I think so. I haven't heard anything. I haven't heard any crying, unless you've heard it in the background. I haven't heard it from here. So I think that's success. That, to be honest.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you. I really do appreciate your time, Kane.
No worries. It's a pleasure. Thank you, Vickie.
Wow. Kane, I'm speaking on behalf of my listeners of Agile Digital Business Podcast. We all want to thank you for the time you spent in that conversation with me last month, and those value bombs of wisdom that you have provided here on the show. To you, my listener, I am honored that you have been spending this time with me. Thank you for your interest in this topic and for the questions that you've asked and the feedback you've provided. I don't know about you, but I'm really looking forward to what is coming in 2020. On many different levels. I am excited to learn more about the voice platform and to share what I'm learning with you. I'm also a little bit nervous about the amazing capabilities of artificial intelligence and all the things that come along with the uses of voice assistants. But as a marketer, I want to be ready for that, and I want you to be ready as well. So I am going to continue with this theme in Season 2 of the podcast, and I will bring more to you about voice first and voice search marketing and other things related to those topics in the voice platform. You hear me say at the end of each episode, teach, inspire, and connect. Those 3 words are themes for me, and they will continue to be themes for me in 2020. I love to teach you what I'm learning. I love to provide inspiration and motivation for you to take what you are working on to the next level. And I love making connections, whether it's people I'm meeting through my work at the university or through my writing and publishing and the work I've been doing as an author, or through the things that Scott and I do together as entertainers and from the music stage. We have so much fun interacting with our audiences and molding and shaping our concerts to meet the needs of our music listeners. I want to be doing the same for you as a podcast listener, molding and shaping this content to meet what you need in 2020. So do reach out, let me know which of the episodes are resonating with you, what topics you'd like for me to cover. I look forward to hearing from you. And remember, you can include the hashtag Agile Digital Biz in your tweets or your LinkedIn posts. I search on and also follow that hashtag so that I can see the questions you're asking and the comments that you're providing and respond here on the show. All right, we've got a whole brand new year in front of us. Are you ready? Let's go out and teach, inspire, and connect.